Okay, I want to do this video just to clarify some of the Solid Professor videos. I want to talk about running object snaps, object snap overrides, and object snap tracking. And I've just got a cheating list over here, so I remember to talk about all these different object snaps. I first want to review setting up what object snaps are always working for you in the background. I'm going to slide down here and I'm going to pick my list of running object snaps, and there they are, or my list of possible object snaps, very similar to the list in the drawing. Endpoint, midpoint, center, and intersection. That's what I like to have working for me in the background all the time. I'm going to pick just to make that disappear. And I'm just going to simply grab the line command. But these running object snaps are working for you anytime AutoCAD is expecting you to pick a point. Now I have endpoint picked, so lines of course have endpoints. You will see that little squares show up. That's the symbol for an endpoint. Arcs have endpoints at either end. Polygons, whether they're drawn with a series of line segments or whether they're drawn with the polyline command or the polygon command, each of those intersections have endpoints, and that's the way they work. If it's on the screen and you pick, whoops, let me get out of there. If it's on the screen, I'll explain what was going on there in a few minutes. If that endpoint symbol is on the screen, no matter where you pick, you're snapping to that endpoint. And I'll just leave it at that. Okay, so that's your endpoint object snap. Midpoint, again, I'll use the line command to demonstrate it. It's prompting me for a point. If I move near an object that has a midpoint, the little triangle shows up. That's the symbol for midpoint. Lines have midpoints. Arcs have midpoints. Line segments of a polygon have midpoints. And again, if the symbol is on the screen and you pick, that's where you're snapping to. And that's midpoint. Center, which is also in running mode right now. If I grab my line command once again and I go near a circle has a center point, and you get the little green square, little green circle showing up, saying that you've picked a center point or that you will be on the center point. If I pick, I'm at the center point. Arcs have center points. When I'm close to it, because I have other running object snaps, when I'm on an arc, I could be on an endpoint or I'm closer to the endpoint, so endpoint kind of takes precedence. But as soon as you get close to an object that has a center point, the little ticky for the center shows up, and I can most easily grab it by just going right to it. And you can see center is being picked. And now I've snapped that line between the centers of that circle and that arc. Excuse me. Next is geometric center. Now that I don't have in running mode, so I have to override all of my running object snaps in order to be able to snap to the geometric center of something. This is especially good for regular polygons. Like I've got a pentagon on the screen. I'm going to grab the line command again, and geometric center is not going to pop up. You know that I have endpoint, midpoint, center, and intersection working for me in the background. I have to hold the shift key down and right click, and that brings up my object snap override menu, and I go down here and find geometric center, and I pick it, and now all of my running object snaps are off, and only that geometric center object snap is working. And if I get close to this polygon that was used, or this polyline that was used to draw this regular polygon, AutoCAD automatically finds the geometric center of it. And I'll pick, and I'm in my line command, so it attached the line to that point. Now here's a very irregular polygon next door to it, but it was drawn with the polyline command. so its geometric center can be calculated. I'll hold the shift key down and pick geometric center again, and all my running object snaps are off, and all I can do is get to the geometric center of something, and I pick it, and whatever calculations need to go on to find the geometric center of that have happened, and I've snapped to it. Now all of my running object snaps are working again. You can see I can grab endpoints and that sort of thing. So I'll hit enter, and we're done with that. Down below that is quadrant. Quadrants. Circles have quadrants. Arcs may have quadrants. They might not have quadrants. I'm going to grab my line command again, and I'm going to override all of my running object snaps. So I'm explicitly asking for the quadrant object snap, and that's the only thing that's working right now. I'll pick that, and when I get near something that has a quadrant, the little diamond shows up, and whichever quadrant I'm closer to, that's the one I'm going to get. So 12, 3, 6, and 9 o'clock on a circle are all snapped to a bow, if that's a word. Okay. This arc happens to pass through 12 o'clock and through 9 o'clock, so I would have two possible quadrants. If this arc did not pass through any of the quadrants, no diamond would ever show up on them. But if I pick, I get that quadrant. If I notice that quadrant doesn't work again, it gets used up as soon as I use it once. I have to shift and right click and grab it again in order to use it again. And I'll hit enter, and we're done with quadrant. Intersection. Intersection is nice. These two lines, which I had there originally, cross each other. So that's an intersection. If I draw a line again and I get close to here, it's hard to see, but that intersection symbol, which is a green X, and smart me is using green lines, and I've got a green X that I'm snapping to, so it's kind of obliterated, but the word intersection shows up, and I'm snapping to that intersection. Now, by creation of that line from quadrant to quadrant, if I zoom in here, you can see that I created another intersection between the very end of that arc and that new line. If I get in here, you can see that intersection shows up again. I pick it, and I've snapped to the intersection of those two objects. I'm going to hit enter to be done with the line command. A weird way, or a very unique way of using intersection is I was using it in a running mode up here. I was just using what's working in the background for me. But these two lines do not intersect. But if this line were to be extended, there is a possible intersection, so to speak. So if I grab line again, but instead of using my running intersection object snap that's working for me in the background, if I do a shift and a right click and I grab intersection, now I'm overriding all of my running object snaps. And if I pick this object, you see you get that little dot, 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 because there is no intersection apparently right there. So I'll pick it, and it'll say down here, and now I need to pick another object, and it'll show me a little X at the intersection of those two objects. So I've snapped to it. Now, in that instance, those two happen to meet at a point along this second line, but it could be just a spot in space. If I just arbitrarily draw another line right here, and I grabbed another line, and I said shift right click intersection, and I picked this and that, there's that intersection out in space. And then I just picked the other endpoint. So that's intersection, and it works kind of two different ways. One way has to be a physical intersection when it's in a running mode. If I ask for it explicitly with an object snap override, it can be a point in space, a non-intersection, but only in a possible intersection. Let's word it that way. Perpendicular is kind of cool. I'm going to draw my line, and I'm just going to pick a point in space here, and I'm going to shift right click and override my running object snaps and say override that with perpendicular. And now when I get close to something, I get that little right angle symbol showing up right here, you can see. And it's creating a right angle between my first point and the object that I'm picking. If I shift right click and do perpendicular again and go towards this object, there's where they become perpendicular. Now perpendicular is kind of cool in the fact that I can ask for it first and then pick a point. And better than the old days, it kind of shows you ahead of time what you're going to get. I'll say my first point, and I'll go perpendicular to this line right here, and you see you can kind of get that dot, dot, dot thing again. It doesn't know where it's going to end up being, but I'm going to be perpendicular to that line, and now as I move around, you can see that it could be a spot out in space, just like those intersections, but you can kind of turn it around. You can pick the first point and then draw then draw perpendicular to something, or you can pick perpendicular to something and then pick where you want to go to. Nearest. I forgot tangent. The tangent object snap is kind of nice. I'm going to get rid of this line because it's getting kind of in the way for this demonstration. I'm going to grab line, and I'm just going to once again grab a spot in space, and then I'm going to shift right click and say I want to draw tangent to this circle. And you can see that it goes right to the tangent point, and the symbol for tangent is that circle with a line over the top. And I've got a nice perfectly smooth tangent line to that arc. You can draw tangent to tangent. If I wanted to connect these with a tangent line, instead of my first point being a spot in space, I can say my first point needs to be tangent to this arc. But again, I get that dot, dot, dot thing going on because it doesn't know where it's going to end up being attaching or where it's going to end up attaching to this arc. But once I pick, then it says, okay, now where do you want to go? And you can kind of see that it moves around. And I'll do a shift right click. I have to ask for tangent again. When I'm overriding my running object snaps, those overrides only last for one pick. And I pick right here, and I get that tangent. And I've got a nice, whoops, I hit enter to end that line command. I've got a line that's tangent to both that arc and that circle. And last but not least is nearest. We don't use nearest very often, but nearest is just, think of it as just being on the object, not necessarily at an endpoint or a midpoint, but just somewhere on the object. Again, I'll draw a line and I'll right click, or excuse me, I'll shift and right click and say I want to be at a point that is nearest to my crosshairs on this object. And the nearest symbol is a little like an hourglass type of thing. Again, this is not at the end point, it's not at the midpoint, it's not at the quarter point, it's just somewhere on that object. I can go from there to shift right click nearest to somewhere on this object. I don't know where I'm going to be, but that line now ends right at that line, and this line ends right at that line. It doesn't go past, it's not a little short, it's right on the line. So those are how to use object snap overrides and the running object snaps working for you in the background. Lastly, what I want to show you is what's called object snap tracking. I typically always have this button down here right next to my running object snaps turned on. And what that means is that I can snap or track off of certain running object snaps. Like, you know, I have endpoint running. If I grab my line command and I go over here and I get that endpoint showing up, if I just sit there for a second and then pull away, you'll see that there's a little green tick there. That means that I can track directly off of that point. And the way I have it set up is that I can set it to track orthogonally, meaning horizontally and vertically. So if I, for some reason or other, needed to come over or leave a gap of 4 units between that endpoint and the endpoint of my new line, I can just say go over 4 and hit enter. And now there's 4 units horizontally between that endpoint and right there. I just left a gap that long. If I wanted to track off of the center, I go up here. You actually have to grab the center. And because I've got a line there, let me cancel out of there. Get this out of there because endpoint was kind of overriding center because I had an endpoint right at the center. And now I'll grab line again and I'll go here. And I can't acquire that center point from here. I have to actually go out there and hover on it for just a second. And then the green ticky mark shows up off it. And when I'm close to horizontal or close to vertical, I can track from there. Okay. It makes it kind of nice if I want to draw, let's just say, whoops, I'm sorry. Let's just say I have a line here that's vertical and I want to draw a line. How do I want to say that? Oh, that's a good one. From here, and I want, whoops, I want to draw a line from here, and I just want to go over until I meet that line. Intersection works for me, and I'm kind of tracking off of this endpoint and working towards that intersection, and it just stops right at that line. Now, because I drew a vertical and that was horizontal, they end up being perpendicular to each other. Where your object snaps really come in handy is, let's just throw a rectangle in here like that. And let's say I want to put a circle right in the middle of that. I can grab my circle tool and I can go over here and acquire the midpoint, hover on it for just a second and pull away. And then I can go up here and acquire that midpoint and hover on it for a second. You can see we got ticks on both midpoints. And then I can track straight down and track straight over. And I've tracked off of those midpoint object snaps and got myself right into the middle of that rectangle. So that's a quick overview of object snap tracking, running object snaps, and object snap overrides. I hope that clarifies some of the Solid Professor material.